All right, we're back to two teams on today's live show. We'll split it up into a couple of episodes for those listening after the fact. And it all has to do with the Dan Besbris vacation schedule, which is, I'll remind you all here at the front end of today's first half of the podcast, I will be out of town with my family on Monday and Tuesday of next week. We'll be at Legoland, actually, on Tuesday. So if anybody's down there, give me a holler. I will probably not be able to see you, but whatever. So the goal here was to get as much done today in as little time as humanly possible, with, of course, making sure the fact that we're going to cover the teams in enough detail where the podcasts are actually, worth their weight in beans. I don't know. I messed that expression up. But the hope here is that I can get this thing done, get through some packing in the afternoon, and then record an episode either for Monday or Tuesday or both, so you won't be left completely podless until Wednesday of next week. Now, again, remains to be seen if we're going to be able to pull this one off, but I'm going to do my best. So, to that end, welcome to Old Man Squad Fantasy Basketball. I'm Dan Besbris. You can find me on Twitter at Dan Besbris. You can find Old Man Squad on Twitter at Old Man Squad. So simple, so straightforward, so easy. So easy. Make sure to follow at Old Man Squad on social media. It will follow you back. That's the Old Man Squad promise. It'll follow you back. It'll also hopefully give you a lot of really cool pods to listen to. So do that also. Take a moment to like, rate, and subscribe here at the front end of the show, no matter how you're taking in the pod. I'll be reminding you of that at the end of this one, the beginning of the next one, all that good stuff, because that is still the most important thing for us as we get a foothold with this brand new podcast adventure. We are covering the Hawks and the Hornets today. Those are the two teams. We're going to go Hawks first. Honestly, because I think it's a little bit more straightforward. Maybe just the simple fact that we have a decent idea of who's going to play on this team is the helpful one. The Hornets, there's still some we sort of don't even really know type of players on there. But if we dive into the Hawks first, that'll, I don't know, like taking some warm-up hacks, because I don't think this one's going to be that hard. All right. So the big news of the offseason so far, as we flash the Basketball Monster Hawks review from last year up on the screen, the big news of the offseason outside of the Paul George move was the Dejounte Murray trade. The Hawks are without Dejounte Murray now. He's been jettisoned off to New Orleans, and they picked up Dyson Daniels. That's the large one. They also got Larry Nance, some first-round picks. That's kind of the big ones. I think Cody Zeller was in that trade also. It doesn't really matter. Nance is the other one that might see a little bit of playing time. But I want to go through the Hawks kind of built on what we saw last year, and then do the swap out at the end. So number one on the Hawks, best fantasy value on the team last year, not surprisingly, was Trey Young. He finished at number 35 on a per game value, but only played in 54 ball games. It was a frightfully not durable season for Trey, which is generally not the norm for him. He's a guy that had, despite his sort of smaller stature at 6'1", about $165, not been a dude who missed a ton of ball games. Missed one game his rookie year. Did miss 12 the COVID season, then 9 the year after that, then 6, 9, and finally this year, 28. That's a tough one. Tough pill to swallow, 28 games missed. Last 2 seasons have been alongside Dejounte Murray. There's been a pretty obvious drop-off in how much exactly he was expected to do. But the biggest thing for Trey was not that the number of shots went down, because the assists actually went up a little bit the last 2 years. The big thing for Trey Young, and I guess there were 2 of them. Big thing number 1, he's back down to 43% shooting, and he basically has been around that mark throughout his NBA career. Remember, early his rookie season, he shot like 38%, and then he got it cooking second half of the year. Second season, he shot 43.7. Third season, 43.8. Then 46. That was the big explosion year when everything came together on offense, and he averaged 28.5 points per game. And the last 2 years, 42.9 and 43 on the nose. I'm going to call it the big change in all this stuff, but one of the bigger changes was that in his big year, in the Trae Young explosion year, which was 2021 to 2022, Trae shot 38% from downtown and 51% from two. Both of those numbers were career highs. So it wasn't just that his shot from outside was falling, it was just that his shot from everywhere was falling. We've seen Trae Young's percentages kind of bob and weave a little bit. 32, 36, 34, 38, 34, 37. That's 3-point field goal percent. We've seen his 2-point numbers bob and weave a little bit, although not nearly as much. 48, 50, 49, 51, 48, 48. So the assumption there is that he's probably going to be around 48, 49. The three-pointers, we really don't know. Career 35.5, but he actually hasn't had a season where he shot near 35.5. It's been like equidistant on both sides of that. And I don't know what Trae Young version we're going to get this coming year. The other big thing for Trae Young this last season, and the reason, frankly, that his value wasn't lower in 9-cat, was that he averaged a career best 1.3 steals per ball game, 0.2 blocks, which got him a solid 0.3 of a defensive stat over his career marks. One reason for that could be that he played the biggest minute per game total, or per game, I guess, so count of his career. And the other is just that it was sort of an anomaly. He had more steals last season, and it's not a thing that we know for a fact is going to keep up. We should also point out, by the way, he shot only 85.5% at the free throw line. He's had a couple of seasons where he shot 89 or 90, and so that's a thing that could potentially come back up a little bit. Roll all of that together, and the story on Trae Young is it should be a pretty damn good season for him, because no Dejounte Murray means probably over 20 shots per ball game again. Probably you'll get 7+ free throws per game. He'll probably shoot 8 or more three-pointers per game and make about 3 of them. What we don't know is, will the assists be in the 9s or the 10s? Will the steals be at 0.9 or 1.3 or something in between? And where are the percentages going to be? Unfortunately, because we don't have and really simply cannot know the exact results of those, it's hard to say exactly where Trae Young is going to end up this year. Because that good season, that one, okay, that's an unfair way to characterize it, but that one really, really big season when Trae Young was number 11, a lot of that was because the percentages were so much better. And I don't know that we can bank on field goal percent being 3 percentage points higher. 3 percentage points on a guy taking 20 shots a game is massive. Looking at this past season for Trae Young, he's basically a punt field goal guy, shooting 43% on 19 shots, 46% on 20 shots. He's just like a small negative in that. You can wipe that out with one even half decent big man. Not even a big field goal percent dude, like a medium one. But I don't know. And the problem, too, the secondary problem, on top of the fact that we just don't know exactly what those numbers are going to look like, the secondary problem is that Trae Young is going to get drafted probably on the turn, based on what people are remembering from the last time he didn't have Dejounte Murray on his team. That's probably where people are going to go and get him. In head-to-head leagues, Trae Young's gigantic turnovers, you sort of semi-half punt those, and you've got a guy who's going to get you pretty damn elite scoring, pretty damn good threes, hyper elite assists. He'll be probably top 2, top 3 in the NBA at the very least in that one, and then very good free throw percent. So you do get kind of like a nice 4-category firm base where, on the Roto side, the complete lack of rebounds, blocks, and field goal percent and bad turnovers counterbalances that pretty hard. On head-to-head, because he was steals, he was sort of like a medium positive, but free throw percent, threes, points were like a pretty solid medium and positive, and assists was a massive positive. He even though his rank was 35, in head-to-head, he was a really good kind of early second round type of play, a guy that you can build on those categories if that was the way you want to build out your team, or a guy who sort of balances out if you got rebounds and blocks and field goal percent and some other stuff with your first round pick. He covers in the gaps on the other side of that. So I feel totally comfortable saying you can draft Trey Young in the second round. I don't know if he's going to make it that far. I think based on the guys that folks are going to be debating towards the end of the first round, do I want to take Kyrie Irving or Kevin Durant, or if Joel Embiid falls that far, or Kawhi Leonard? A lot of these guys people are going to point at and go, those guys never make it through a season. Trey Young didn't make it through a season this one time. But maybe I'll go get the guy who's not going to be as high on the per game side, most likely, but gives these big, 3 or 4 categories. And I don't care that he's terrible in others. Trey Young is built more for that head-to-head, very good in some, pretty bad in others, as opposed to, honestly, one of the players we just talked about was like a Kyrie Irving, who's pretty good in a whole bunch of stuff, doesn't have that obvious big downside other than health. So you can see kind of where the argument gets made there. And if Trey Young is sitting around at like pick 14 and you're debating between him and a guy that probably won't make it through the year, you probably have to take the guy that will. Over and over and over again, I come on these shows and I say I'm going to remember at some point, like around the 10 to 15 minute mark, to say, let's take a quick commercial break. And I never remember to do it until today. So let's take a quick commercial break. When we come back, I'll have my water and we'll break down the rest of the Atlanta Hawks. And even the folks watching live are going to watch me get up and run away to get my water. Had to figure out some way to go get my water, and that certainly turned out to be the most reasonable way to do it. Okay, the rest of the Atlanta Hawks. So Trey Young's a big story. Obviously, Zaccharie Risacher and Dyson Daniels are kind of the big stories of guys that are on their way in. But who's left in Atlanta that didn't get traded out because Dejounte Murray is gone, Saddiq Bey is hurt and also gone. You're left with Jaylen Johnson, Bogdanovic, Clint Capella, Onyeka Okongwu. Those are the 4 Hawks holdovers that require our attention. Jaylen Johnson is going to be maybe the biggest, but certainly if not the biggest, then one of the biggest hype guys coming into this fantasy season. And for good reason. He's incredible in a lot of categories. He had not great free throw shooting, but otherwise you saw just lots and lots and lots of stuff. He averaged 16 points. That's on the way up. 1.3 3-pointers is on the way up. Almost 9 rebounds, 3.5 assists out of that forward spot. 2 combined defensive stats. Gotta love that. 51% from the field. Gotta love that as well. He finished at number 46 in 9-cat. Obviously better than that if you were punting free throws, but I don't think that was the plan when you took him super late in a draft or picked him up off the waiver wire. My assumption, and I feel like this is one of those balance 2 thoughts in your heads kind of moments. He will be a very fun player to roster this year. He will also probably be a player that's too expensive on draft night because he finished at 46 last season. I think the assumption is that with Dejounte Murray gone, some of those shots are going to fall to Jaylen Johnson. So everybody's going to be going and getting him probably a round ahead of where he finished last season. I expect Jaylen Johnson to be drafted in the mid to late 3rd round this year. And you have squeezed a lot of the value out of him at that point. There's a chance that it's not all. There's a chance that he might be able to go a little bit higher than that. He's going to have to fix his free throw shooting to do it. But let's say he takes 14 shots per game instead of 12.5. We got a little bit of a taste of that down the stretch. His scoring didn't change that much because his field goal percent was a little bit lower. But, Trey Young was out for a while. Remember, late this season, Trey Young missed a bunch of time. Jaylen Johnson took 14 shots instead of a dozen. His scoring went up to 17. Rebounds went up to 9. Assists went up to 4.5. He was still hovering in that 40 to 60 range because his free throw shooting stunk. And that, therein lies the rub. unless he fixes the free throw stroke, it's going to be awfully hard for Johnson to crack that top 25 on 14 shots per game. He kind of needs to get into the 15 to 16 range. And then we're going to need to see, more threes, fixed free throw. There's a whole bunch of stuff that kind of needs to happen for him to justify the third round draft position. And because of that, I think it's possible that Jaylen Johnson kind of cashed in his value chips last year. That is to say, he's going to be good this season, but I don't know if he's going to be as good as where everybody's taking him. Which is a shame because I'd love to have him on my fantasy team. So again, try to hold these two thoughts in your head at the same time. I would love to have a whole bunch of Jaylen Johnsons on my fantasy teams, but I don't know if I'm going to be able to go get him, especially if it's like pick 32 and I'm picking between Jaylen Johnson and, I don't know, like a dude that I think has, first round or top 15 upside with maybe a little bit more health risk. I'd probably go to that mega upside dude. Bogdanovic had an unbelievably strong season last year. He finished at number 63, played 30 minutes a ball game, 17 points, 3 boards, 3 assists, 3 threes. Yahtzee, 1.2 steals. That was weirdly high for him. Oh, sorry, I'm looking at... No, that's right. Massive free throw mark at 92%. I know he didn't take that many, but even if you don't take that many, if you pretty much make every single one, then you're a nice positive impact guy. Bad field goal percent, but he was able to overwhelm that with other good categories. And if you're wondering, how did Bogdanovic look down the stretch? If you're trying to sort of gauge that against the full body of work, the answer was pretty similar. Second half of the season, he was number 76 on 17, 3.5, and 3 with just under. So he was at 1 steal. And then, big free throw number and not great free throw percent. There isn't really a whole lot that happened to make you think Bogdanovic is about to lose stuff that he's doing. And frankly, he may end up being one of the better values on this team because everybody's looking for the big jump from guys coming in. And everybody's looking for the big jump from Trey Young. But there's got to be someone else. Dejounte Murray took 19 shots a game last year. That is a lot to leave on the table when you think of, okay, we got a rookie coming in. How many shots is Risacher even going to get right out of the gate? 10? 12? Max, I would think. Saddiq Bey being hurt and out. That was 11 shots out the door. And yeah, a lot of it's going to get split up and the new guys are going to get some. But some is going to go to the old guys here, the ones that have been sticking around. And for Bogdanovic, a nice little sort of point of reference. If you look at when did Trey Young miss most of his games? I think it was pretty close to the end of the season. Bogdanovic was taking 14 shots a game basically all year, regardless of who was out there with him. You can kind of pen that in. And if his stuff stays somewhat similar, top 75 is very well within reach. Boring or not, classic shooting guard fantasy appeal. Points, threes, free throw percent. Those are your positives. Maybe you could squeeze out a positive in assists, but then you're just hoping to kind of tread water in defensive stats. Don't be too terrible in rebounds and field goal percent. And that's kind of the story on Bogdanovic. I think he's going to be an okay draft pick this coming year, and I think he's going to slide because I don't know that anybody's really all that excited about it. So here's the thing about fantasy drafts, and this applies every single year. The top of the board is always just, the first 25 to 30 are the big names. And then there's usually 3 or 4 guys blended in there. Maybe 10% of those picks are dudes that fantasy GMs are really hoping take that next stretch. And then from 30 to 50 is a lot of times these are guys that are sort of falling that could have gone sooner. And then a handful of other guys. 50 to 65 is where you get a lot of guys that folks think are taking a good size step, but not all the way to the top. And then 65 to 95 is a little bit of a free-for-all, and it'll depend entirely on the opponents that you have in your league. But that's where you can oftentimes find a lot of really interesting values because people are going to do something crazy in there and they're going to pass over a really obvious and easy one. I think Bogdanovic is probably going to be a relatively easy one, provided he's healthy. He's going to play. The Hawks are not in tank mode yet. Maybe they get there. Maybe they trade some of these other dudes away, but they still have most of their dudes. They just happen to fall into a first overall pick as well. Let's talk about the center spot before we get to the new guys. Clint Capella and Onyeka Okongwu pretty much split the center minutes this last year. There were very rare occasions where they played alongside one another for about 3 to 4 minutes in a ball game. It didn't happen all that often, but it's one of the reasons why the two guys combined for about 51-ish minutes per game instead of 48. On top of the fact that Capella, who missed 9 ball games, and Okongwu, who missed 27, that allowed the other one to just get a few extra minutes when one or the other was on the shelf. I wouldn't strongly advise drafting either of these dudes. I hope that sunk in. I probably should have said it with a little bit more fire in my belly. I do not strongly recommend either of these dudes. We know Clint Capella is on the trade block, and we know he's blocked out Okongwu while he's still there. This is a mess. This is a mess that could linger. And for basically 2 full seasons right now, we've heard the same refrain. Oh, Capella's got to be gone. It's time for Okongwu. Okongwu's going to step up. Got to draft Okongwu because he's going to step into that role. Maybe this is the year, but I'd rather not be the team that just sits on him the whole season and waits for him to get there. Okongwu's going to be fine. You know, he gets his 24, 25 minutes a ball game on occasion, and that gets him somewhat close to that top 100 mark. And if Capella's minutes do taper at all, then they kind of flip-flop because Capella was 93, Okongwu was 108. They got there in slightly different ways. Capella, more of a punt free throw, rebound specialist. Okongwu, better at the foul line, not nearly as good as a rebounder. But they're not all that different. These are relatively traditional center build type of guys for fantasy sports. And they're splitting the minutes right now. The only way I would look into either of them as to say these are not targets for me on fantasy draft night is if Capella slips to like 125, then I'd say, all right, fine. Like I'm going to get a guy who probably will end up between 85 and 105, and I'll get him a little bit late. And for Okongwu, honest to goodness, I just don't think I'm drafting him. I think it's going to be too much of a pain. If you're in head-to-head, you're going to be like, why am I doing this? I'm sitting on a guy who's getting me very little day-to-day. He's mostly doing his damage with low turnovers. Roto, you could make a slightly better argument for just having him, but he's also just, he's not doing much. If you drafted Okongwu in Roto, you're probably planning on not playing him daily unless Capella goes down or gets traded or whatever. And maybe Capella does get moved, and maybe in mid-February, Okongwu finally ascends to this top 40 run that we've been waiting on for 2 years plus now. But I'm just not willing to sit on a guy for 4 months and hope it happens. Someone's probably going to get annoyed with him between day 1 and day, 120 or whatever it is anyway. I think I'd just rather it be somebody else's problem. I think you can find better center values in the 100 range than these guys. So again, unless we're talking more like 11th, 12th round instead of 8th or 9th, it's just not an area that I'm hard targeting. By the way, DeAndre Hunter finished at 154 last year. I would imagine that his role doesn't change all that much. Risacher comes in and likely slides into the Sadiq Bey spot, so that keeps Hunter kind of slightly at bay. Am I drafting Risacher? Not a chance. Not a chance. We know enough about Risacher's numbers to point at his international stuff and say this dude already wasn't putting up good percentages. I basically never trust a rookie that didn't have good percentages at an easier level of basketball. Now, the jump from EuroLeague to the NBA is smaller than, say, the jump from college to the NBA, but Risacher, his last And he had one like 15 game stretch in EuroLeague where he shot 57%, but it really didn't feel like that was a sustainable number. His past run here was at 44%. He's been in the high 60s to low 70s at the foul line. His steals and blocks are not overwhelmingly impressive. He's really more of a scorer, three-point shooter. And maybe over time he becomes an interesting fantasy play as he gets a whole bunch of usage, but I don't think he's getting that right out of the chute. So Risacher is a hard no for me to start off his fantasy tenure. And then the last name that I wanted to talk about on the Hawks is Dyson Daniels, who, I think the real prize in the Dejounte Murray trade was the picks. But at the same time, Dyson Daniels is pretty good. I think we've forgotten that he was a lottery pick. I think he went 8th a couple years ago. And this season, we got a glimpse of why he went early enough. And that glimpse was he played 22 minutes per game for New Orleans this past season. Didn't shoot the ball all that well. 45% from the field, only 64 at the foul line, but he basically doesn't get fouled. 6 points, blech. 4 rebounds, okay. 2.7 assists, 1.4 steals, and 0.4 blocks. Again, that's in 22 minutes per ball game. There are a lot of players like this. Dyson Daniels, we talked about Alex Caruso, a week back. Earlier this week, I think we talked about, who the hell was it that we had our other defensive stat wizard? What team was that? Doesn't matter. You guys probably remember better than I do. We'll work backwards through the teams we've talked about. Was it a Rocket? No. Who the hell was it? It wasn't KCP yesterday. It was somebody else. Anyway, doesn't matter. There are going to be these late defensive stat wizards available in drafts. My only recommendation is just get one. Use your other late picks to go try to snap somebody up who might be able to get you some counting stats, because those are going to be a little bit harder to find as the season goes on. But use one of your late picks on a defensive stat wizard, because someone's going to blow up. What I'm not certain of is whether Dyson Daniels is just going to slot into Dejounte Murray's starting hole and play 26, 27 minutes, because when he was doing that for the Pelicans this last year, he had some really robust defensive fantasy lines, like truly impressive. You can go through the Dyson Daniels game by game and figure out the days where enough players were hurt that he got those bonus minutes, because his minutes were all over the map. Some of it happened very early in the season. I think he started a handful of games. Was that the McCollum injury? I'm trying to remember. Most of November. And during that stretch, his run of steals, when he moved into the starting lineup on November 8th, it went 4-1-0, 3-3, 1-1-1-1, 6. And then he only played 24 minutes, and it didn't come back all that soon after that. But those are some colossal steals numbers. 2 threes, a 4, and a 6 blended in there. Later on in the season, he'd sort of surface for a game here or there. January 13th, he got a start and played 37 minutes. He actually didn't have any defensive stats in that one, but he went for 10, 6, and 7. So otherwise fairly well-rounded. He got a start on April 5th, played 37 minutes in that ball game, had 2 steals to go with 7 points and 7 boards. So you're not going to get much besides steals and threes and some rebounds out of Daniels. But again, there is the upside for them to be, the steals in particular, to be really massive, to be like a very cheap iteration of Jalen Suggs. I don't know that you're going to have to draft him. I just... But I think I might. No, he's one of those like 11th, 12th, 13th rounders, because there's no guarantee he's going to get starters minutes. And even if he does, there's kind of no guarantee that he does enough on the fantasy side. But you kind of feel like if he plays 30 minutes a game, he could approach 2 steals a ball game. And a player like that just has inherent value built in. Like there's almost no way that a 2 steals a game guy can be worse than about top 115, which is kind of like where Marcus Smart ended up last year. And if Daniels grabs a rebound or gets a block or whatever, then that's how he kind of moves up beyond that. A quick recap on the Hawks here before we flip on over to the other half of our discussion today. Dyson Daniels, late round flyer, I think is worth it. Okongwu, I'm probably not going to deal with the headache of either he or Capella unless Clint falls pretty damn far in drafts. I would say well outside of the top 100 is where I would consider that. Bogdanovic, I think I'd draft anywhere outside of the top 75 for a value. Jaylen Johnson, I would love to have on my teams, but I don't think he's going to fall far enough for me. I would be looking at him in the 40s, and I don't think he gets there. Trey Young is probably a mid-second round pick, but he probably ends up going about 5-6 slots before that. Just make sure if you are drafting Trey Young, you've sort of kind of set yourself into a particular team build, because in all likelihood, we're talking about, like picks 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, somewhere in there. So you're not going to find a transcendent big man to pair him with. So you're sort of saying, okay, I'm probably going to have to lean into what Trey's good at. And then you're going pretty guard heavy. And your bigs you're looking for are probably bigs that are better in some of the guard stats, like a big who steals, a big who shoots free throws, a big who knocks down 3-pointers. You probably end up punting blocks in a situation like that while still trying to win points, threes, boards, assists, steals, free throw percent, and then turnovers is probably whatted if Trey Young is one of your top 2 picks. And those, I believe, are the Atlanta Hawks for this coming season. And I think we covered them in pretty good detail. I hope we did, because now we have to pivot to a team that, in my mind, is extremely complicated, and that's the Charlotte Hornets. But before we do that, because the folks that are listening to this episode after the fact, you're actually going to have a game break. What do I mean by that? Well, we'll have a fade out. You'll hear the music start to fade out. And then a couple hours later, the Hornets show will get loaded up. Whereas YouTubers right now, you can kind of just get them back to back. It's largely a time-related issue today. When I come back from vacation, we might be 2 days away from Yahoo League's opening at that point, but we'll try to separate every team into its own show. Again, it's just going to be based on how much time I have. Kids are still, my younger kid, his summer break goes through Labor Day, and then camps are basically over. So there's going to be like a 2-week stretch coming up where my schedule is real weird, but whatever, it doesn't matter. Bear with it. So again, folks that are listening after the fact, thank you so much for listening to this Hawks episode. Please make sure to like, rate, subscribe, all that important stuff. Follow on Twitter at Dan Besbris and at Old Man Squad. And stay tuned for the other show dropping a little bit later on today. YouTubers, just hang out. We'll get that going here in a matter of seconds. All right, welcome into the second half of our double dip on Friday. It's Friday. It's August the 2nd. This is, I got to get my organization hat on. This is the Charlotte Hornets half of our 2 episodes on Friday. If you're watching on YouTube, thank you. We're just sort of floating our way through from one show to the other. If you're listening after the fact, this is the start now of a new episode of Old Man Squad Fantasy Basketball. I'm Dan Besbris. I am also running the Old Man Squad feed for the most part, at least right now, although that's actually not going to be forever. Please do take a moment to follow at Dan Besbris. Follow at Old Man Squad. There's all this stuff that I need you guys to do. What else do I need you guys to do? Let's see. I did the like, rate, subscribe, I think, right? Did I do that, or was that at the end of the other episode? Well, like, rate, and subscribe, follow, all that good stuff. And let's start embarking upon what should be a very weird program. And that is, deep breath, the Charlotte Hornets. The Charlotte Hornets have what I would argue is, maybe some of the biggest questions in terms of roster build in the NBA. I know we have the main guys on that Charlotte roster. And they drafted Tijan Salon, who, I mean, I don't know how much he's going to play, if at all, this coming season. And there's frankly just only so many years that the Hornets can be in tank mode, some of it on purpose, some of it by accident, whatever. But almost everything related to Charlotte has to, I think, come down to whether or not Lamelo Ball can stay upright through a season. And to this point, he sort of hasn't been able to. There was one year where he basically made it through the whole season, but more often than not, you're looking at like a quarter to a half a year's worth of basketball games, and it happened again this last year. Lamelo Ball played 22 games this just completed season. The numbers are hard to argue with. He was number 23 in 9-cat. Some of the downside there was the 3.8 turnovers. The 43% shooting was also a bit of a buzzkill. It was a lot like Trey Young, slightly lower assists, slightly higher rebounds and steals. The other stuff is pretty much in parallel with Trey. Are we willing to take a shot? Are we willing to take a shot on Lamelo Ball? I mean, this is like the ultimate in big swing type of thought. Because for many years, I just kept telling you guys, I don't want Lamelo Ball at the end of the first round. And everybody was like, it's fine. We're punting turnovers. I'm like, okay. All right. You do what you got to do. And then he's hurt again. And I get the feeling, and again, we'll have more information on this in a week, probably. But I get the feeling that the ankle stuff, the ankle story, has now caught up and is part of LaMelo's public perception. There was a long stretch there where the perception was still just about the numbers he was putting up. And the fear over the ankle wasn't hanging over him on draft night. I think that ankle fear is now hanging over LaMelo Ball. And so in a week when we see those pre-ranks, or a week or two after that when you get the first ADP information coming out from Yahoo, I feel pretty confident that LaMelo's not going to be getting drafted near the turn this year, that he's going to fall to at least the middle of the second round, maybe towards the back end of it. And that's going to be a tempting spot to consider taking him. Because especially if you're punting turnovers or field goal percent, he's basically a first rounder in those spots. 24 points, 3 threes, 5 boards, 8 assists, 2 defensive stats, good free throw number. Like, that stuff doesn't grow on trees. That's the type of stuff you generally can't find beyond pick 14 or 15 in a fantasy draft. And so what if that is presented to you at like pick 26, the beginning of the third round? Are you going to have the fortitude to say no? Are you going to have the strength of core to pass on LaMelo Ball? Or I guess you could flip that around and look at it from the other perspective. Are you going to have the nuts to say yes? What's Dan do? I guess that's why you're listening to the podcast. What would Dan do? Dan says no. I know there's a lot to be excited about with LaMelo Ball because those stats really are very, very juicy. But if there's one thing that I've preached over the years on this podcast, in addition to simplifying fantasy sports for those of us that play, trying to get the most out of fantasy sports while doing the least amount of work, the other thing I've preached is you can lose, but not win your fantasy league with your first 3 rounds of picks. I don't care how good your picks are in the first 3 rounds. It's not going to win you the league. It might get you near the top, but it's not going to win you the league. If you have an early pick that basically does what LaMelo did last year, like if you drafted LaMelo Ball with pick 11 or something like that, because he was going 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, somewhere in that neck of the woods, you probably didn't win your league. I'm sure there was a very, very small percentage of you guys out there that drafted LaMelo Ball, but maybe got the best second, third, fourth, and fifth round picks all combined, and you were able to overcome it. But most teams that had LaMelo Ball cooked. I had him on one team. Don't know why. After I spent the entirety of draft season saying I don't want anything to do with LaMelo at this early juncture, I ended up deciding I wanted to do a LaMelo category punt, basically punt, field goal percent, punt, turnover was probably what I was looking at. And that team was just cooked. 1 month into the season, dead. Freaking dead. And I know you should never write a player off completely. And we won't, okay? We'll be thorough about this. If LaMelo Ball falls to the middle of the third round, have at it. Because at that point, it's the Kawhi dilemma again, where it's like, look, Kawhi Leonard was going at pick 24, 25 last year. This is a guy who's always top 7. And so then you're like, all right, if I can get 62 games out of him, he beats his ADP by a decent chunk. Anything over that is gravy. We got, by the way, 6 more games than that last year. So big time gravy. LaMelo Ball becomes a similar proposition. Oh, okay, I can draft LaMelo at pick 32. Great. If I get to 60 games out of him, he probably beats that totals mark, especially if you're punting something. But is he going to get to 60 this year? I haven't seen anything from Ball to suggest that he's dealing with this chronic ankle stuff, which is weird to say that I feel almost more comfortable with Kawhi Leonard. But at least you kind of, going into a season what you're getting with Kawhi. He's going to sit out a bunch of ball games. He didn't last year. He tried to play through them, and then he ended up getting hurt anyway. So it sort of was like 6 of one, half dozen of another. LaMelo, he'll just play and play and play, and then all of a sudden, boom, done, leg gone. I hate it. But again, like if you're after pick 32, you obviously have to do it. I just don't think there's any chance he gets there. Another player that's going to play a lot for the Hornets this coming season is Miles Bridges. Charlotte retained Miles, and he is not a player that I really want to root for. And I'll say the same thing I said last year. If you choose to draft and play Miles Bridges, I have no problem with you as a human being. You do what you got to do. I personally believe that I can win my fantasy league without him. He will probably be a perfectly reasonable value this year. He was number 57, although admittedly he did a lot with LaMelo out, so one would assume it'll be a little bit less this coming year if LaMelo is actually upright. Same story for kind of Mark Williams as the Hornets went down 2 of their pretty important guys a month and a half into the season, and they never came back. Did LaMelo come back for like 2 games? He might have. It doesn't matter. So Miles Bridges getting 17, 18 shots a game, maybe not quite that many. But I mean, he's still going to have fantasy value. You're still looking at a guy who's probably going to hover, second half of this last year when LaMelo was pretty much not there at all. Miles Bridges played 38 minutes a night and took 18 shots. He was number 66. The defensive stats were not as high as I think we'd hope. The field goal percent wasn't quite as high as we'd hope. He probably gets drafted. I mean, there are enough people out. There's going to be at least one GM in every league that's like, yeah, I'm totally fine with this, with the Miles Bridges stuff. So I'm going to take him at 60 or whatever. I just don't think we have to. I really don't care if you guys come with me on that journey or not. I'm not going to judge you. If you feel like you need him to win your fantasy league, fine. That's totally okay. I personally believe, and now this year he's not going to be like last year. You probably could have drafted him at 100, 110 or whatever because no one really knew like how much he was going to play, how fast they were going to get him reintegrated, etc. This year, everybody already knows. So there's probably not really a value with Miles Bridges as much as there is like, I hate the fact that I have to use the term that he's kind of like a safe pick in fantasy sports because as a human being, he's not so safe to be around. But here's the thing. My thought on him remains exactly the same. I don't care if you draft him. Do what you got to do. I will not judge you. I'm not again, no judgment of any kind. I just personally believe that if you follow our methods that we talk about on this podcast, we can win without him. We don't have to. Just don't have to worry about it because I want to root for my team. I want to root for the players on my fantasy team. I want to be their fans as they put up numbers and go, yeah, nice play, whoever, Anthony Davis. So anyway, let's talk about Brandon Miller instead, because he came on real strong in the second half last year when guys were like completely gone. They had traded away Gordon Hayward. They had traded away Terry Rozier. It was I mean, it was a Brandon Miller free for all. I don't think there's any chance that Brandon Miller comes into this season and takes 16 or more shots right out of the chute. Especially if you look at like the last, let's see, go to the last month of last season. I mean, I guess he was still around 15, 16 shots a ball game. He was putting up some pretty good numbers in that stretch. The low field goal percent and the dip in defensive stats created this sort of like weird non-value bubble. But, if we get like a 46% Brandon Miller shooting, he's a decent foul shooter. He should be able to get you about 1.5 defensive stats. The issue there, of course, is I just don't know that there's going to be enough stuff if Lamelo Ball and Miles Bridges are both upright. Brandon Miller's probably the third option, and that probably pushes him back down towards 14 to 15 shots instead of the 15 to 17 range. And then to that end, I just don't know that his fantasy profile supports a high draft pick. Again, unless somebody gets out of his way, but I just like, who's left for them to move? Who's left to move that would give Brandon Miller a bigger pathway? Over the entire season last year, Miller took 14.5 shots per game. He was number 117 in 9-cat. The downtick for him was field goal percent, where he was at 44%. So maybe that gets a little bit better, but he's not a particularly strong rebounder. He's not a particularly strong passer yet. Steals and blocks are fine. Reminds me an awful lot, actually, of the Jabari Smith Jr. fantasy profile, which is like, power forward, small forward, whatever, who plays more like a shooting guard. Jabari Smith is a better rebounder, so maybe I shouldn't draw a comparison too tight there, which actually gives him more upside. But I don't think I'm drafting Brandon Miller in 9-category leagues this year. I don't think there's a clean enough path for him to jump forward by 2, 3, 4 rounds, which is kind of what you're looking for if you're looking at a guy in that 90, 100 range, which is probably where he ends up getting drafted. And then, of course, Nick Richards ended up having a pretty good season last year. But a lot of that was because Mark Williams went down 19 games in, and then he was doubtful for 60 games after that. We don't even know if Mark Williams is healthy coming into this season. I'm going to assume that he is, unless I hear otherwise, but we don't know. Which makes Mark Williams a super intriguing fantasy play. Because you're probably not going to have to draft him any earlier than 90. He was going in the 80s this past year, which, by the way, he's an argument. Well, the back injury is not, but the per game number for Mark Williams is an argument for an early fantasy draft, because in August he was going at like 110, and by October he was going at 80. And I took him at 80 in some spots, and I felt totally fine about it. And he came out of the gates, and he was rolling right around the edge of the top 50. He looked really, really good. And his back blew out, and we never heard from him again. But 13 points, 10 rebounds, 1.9 defensive stats, 65% from the field, and 72, which ain't bad for a traditional big at the free throw line. The profile is there for him to move towards that top 50. You give him one more shot a ball game. If he's just the tiniest bit more involved, screw one more shot. He only played 27 minutes a game this last year. If he somehow gets healthy and gets that up to 28 or 29, that's a ticket to the top 50 right there. I get the feeling you won't have to draft Mark Williams any earlier than last season. 80, 90, 100 range. I'm all about it. Because what happens if he fails? What happens if he's not healthy? You blow your 7th, 8th round pick on it? Your team can recover from that. But he's probably an 8th rounder with a chance to be a 4th or 5th rounder in per game value. There's a lot to like about that. And he fits into what Adam Stock, remember we talked to Adam a few weeks back about punting strategy. there are traditional big men all over the map that just sit as values in fantasy drafts because they don't score that much. You got to make sure you get your points somewhere else. But if you're in a punt threes build, traditional bigs are delightful. You don't need to blow a pick on a big man early who hits 3-pointers because you don't need that part of their game. Is there anyone else on Charlotte that I'm looking at? Because right now, I think Lamelo Ball is going to be an extremely risky play that I'm probably not going to do. Miles Bridges is a relatively safe pick that I'm probably not going to do for other reasons. Brandon Miller, I think, is probably going to be a little bit overdrafted because he played out the stretch last year with only Miles Bridges, Brandon Miller, and then around them. And then Mark Williams is probably going to be a little bit of a value this season. Is there anyone else? Salon, no. Nick Richards, no. They acquired Josh Green from the Mavs. I think he'll play a little bit, but I don't much care for his fantasy game anyway. So no. Trey Mann, no. They brought Seth Curry in, no. Taj Gibson, player coach, no. Vasilije Micic, no. Nick Smith. People keep telling me Nick Smith is about to be a thing, but I don't think there's enough room for him as the team is currently constructed. He'll be probably duking it out with Josh Green and Trey Mann and Micic and all these guys for some of that playing time. The only other player I would even remotely consider, and I don't think there's a reason. In fact, I'll amend that. I know there's absolutely no reason to draft him, but you can keep one eye on Grant Williams because it was a little bit of a homecoming for him, and he played pretty well down the stretch, like the last month when everybody was benched. He was sitting in that 150 range, but that's really more of a specialist appeal. Get some 3-pointers and a few rebounds out of a decent field goal percentage guy. He fills in some, leaks in your team's boat, but he's not a guy that you're trotting out there every night. He's just simply not good enough. And not that many Hornets were last season, by the way. Especially once they started shutting guys down, and it was just like this massive wave of inefficiency hitting the team. It was gross how inefficient they were. Nick Richards shot 69% from the field, but the regulars, the guys taking the shots, Miles Bridges was at 46, Brandon Miller was at 43, Cody Martin was at 35, Trey Mann was at 45, Grant Williams was the guy, 50% on 10 shots a game. Davis Bertans, 40, Micic, 43, Pokuševski got in there to shoot 43. They couldn't throw a stone in the frickin' ocean, this team. And the worst part was not that many of them were good foul shooters. Brandon Miller was at 81%. Miles Bridges fell off a table. He was 76 down the stretch. Trey Mann was 75. Grant Williams, 75. Micic and Bertans were decent free throw shooters. So, you had a lot of guys that, and we talked about this on the show extensively last year. It was a different show, mind you, but it was still me hosting. It just had a different name. That the team was like all points league type guys. The turnovers weren't super high, but they were generally bad in both percentages. Which is why, as I once again sort of roll the tape back on this team, the guys that I think you should be looking at are Mark Williams, assuming he's upright, because he's relatively efficient, so he's not blowing you up there. And then if Lamelo Ball falls far enough, you can overlook some of his inefficiencies because the counting stuff is so freaking good that the good outweighs the bad. But you can't possibly use a second-round pick on a dude that can't make it through a season. It's got to be third or deeper. And I don't know if it's happening. God love you, Hornets. I hope you win a couple of ball games this year. I really do. I don't know how much more that franchise can take. They just keep making these weird draft picks. Although Brandon Miller ended up being okay, but, everybody was like, you guys should take Scoot and try to draft him, develop him as a superstar. Is Brandon Miller ever going to be a superstar? I don't know. I'm not a dynasty guy, and I don't have to worry about that. I'm talking redraft right now. As we approach the end of our Friday afternoon, evening double dip, depending on how you're taking in the podcast, just a quick reminder that I will be out of town Monday and Tuesday of next week. I am attempting to record an episode in advance. That'll drop one of those days. But if I don't, don't worry. The show will be back on Wednesday, regardless of whether I have something that I can put out on Monday or Tuesday. Also, reminder, please, Lord, as you go into your weekend, please take a second to click a thumbs up on a bunch of our YouTube stuff. Maybe you have I don't know, maybe you have 90 seconds to go through and click thumbs up on a bunch of things on the Old Man Squad page. That would actually be super helpful. A bunch of thumbs up. Click the subscribe button. That's a big deal no matter how you're taking in the show. And then if you're listening on Apple or Spotify in particular, please take that 60 seconds to drop a 5-star review. I think on Spotify, you can do it in 10 seconds. Apple, it takes 1 minute. Either way, it means a ton, especially now with Yahoo Leagues getting close to opening. This is when I want to make sure everybody knows that my new feed and new network exist. So tell your friends, tell somebody in your league. I need you guys to do this for me. I'm going to be working my freaking tail off. There are going to be so many pods and so many Twitter threads leading up to and through the season. So you're really going to get 180% of Dan for the first time ever. And you guys thought I did a lot before. Get ready for this one. But I do need your help to continue to spread the word. So please do like, rate, and subscribe. Follow on Twitter. Follow Old Man Squad so you see when all the episodes drop. And tell your friends about Old Man Squad as well. Have a great weekend, everybody. I may or may not appear before you on Monday or Tuesday while I'm at Legoland. Either way, I will see you live, most likely again, Wednesday of next week. Have a great weekend. We'll see you soon one way or the other.